Welcome everybody. Welcome to this week's webinar in the series of the Mass Participation World weekly webinars. Tonight's title, which you'll all obviously be well aware of, How to Come Out of COVID-19 with an Engaged Volunteer Workforce. I'm Robb. For those of you that don't know me, lots of familiar names on the call. Wonderful to see you. Thanks for joining some of our regulars and quite a few new faces. Nice to see Carl Smith there, come to check up on Shaun to say that he says the right thing. Thank you, and plenty more. So those lots of people have introduced as well. Continue to do that if you wouldn't mind. Hello, Marius Mare from muggy London, Nick Lovelock from the Gold Coast. As I mentioned, Robb. I'm the CEO and founder of Mass Participation World. Delighted to have a hugely qualified panel in this space tonight from across the world a little bit as well. Starting over there in muggy London, welcome Kirsty Wilde, the Operations Director of Human Race. Thanks for joining us, Kirsty. The gentleman that had a haircut specially for tonight, Mark Emerton, the CEO and owner of Elite Events down there on the south coast of New South Wales at that delightful Jervis Bay. Next along on the screen, Shaun joining us from Singapore. Shaun is the operations manager for IRONMAN Asia. Welcome, Shaun. Great to see you. And I guess the real guru in the room, the expert in this space. He didn't want me to call him a guru when we had the practice call last night, but humble as ever. Shannan Gove, the co-founder and director of Rosterfy, calling in from Geelong, which is along the coast from Melbourne in Australia. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen and lady. Wonderful to have you here. A couple of other initiatives that I'm running, which some of you or quite a lot of you are part of already, but just in case you're not aware of. Every Monday we have two calls, Strength in Numbers they called, 8:30 a.m. Singapore time and 4:30 p.m. Singapore time. That's literally just an open Zoom room that I host, Zoom chat room. And it's really just people coming together, sharing what they're experiencing, asking questions, having chats, and just generally supporting each other. Some people just like to come along and listen. I generally post all the details of these on my LinkedIn page and on the MPW Facebook page. So if you're looking for those, just connect with me on LinkedIn, or otherwise just email me directly, chris@chrisrob.asia, and very happy to help with any questions you may have or give you the links to those. I started an initiative, time's flown by, we're in our 6th week already, called the Aid Station. And what that is basically 15-minute interviews from all over the world with people from the industry. I pre-record them on Zoom. They go live every weekday. This morning was Mary Wittenberg, the former CEO of the New York Roadrunners. I had a fascinating conversation earlier in the week with the race director of the Beirut Marathon, 48,000 participants. And today I had a great conversation with an amazing gentleman in Gaborone in Botswana, which will go live tomorrow. So we're getting some great feedback on those. If you know of people that might be appropriate to be on, we've had Shannan on there. Shannan was one of our early guests, and just really trying to cover as much of the world as possible to give people a sense of what people are dealing with in these times. This series happens every Thursday. Typically in this time slot, it varies a little bit in terms of the panelists that we have. Some days we run 2 sessions. Next week we have the 2nd edition of one which was incredibly successful a few weeks back and now will become monthly. It's called The New Operational Normal, and we have Mike Nishi, who is the partner of Chicago Event Management. Amazing guy, Mike, incredibly open and sharing with the information he shares. And Hugh Singh, who would be known to Shaun, who is the Managing Director of Event Health Management and also the Medical Director of Standard Chartered Singapore Marathon. So we talk about, all things what the operational normal may look like. And then that'll follow on in following weeks with insurance, sponsorship, content creation, and building tech stacks for your business. So yeah, please feel free. These are for you in the industry. Let me know if there's any topics that you want, and email me directly. Over the course of the next sort of 50 minutes that are left now, we're going to try and touch on 7 key areas under this topic. We're going to talk about communication. What are you saying and when during this period of no events? We're going to talk about safety, and certainly that was a conversation on our planning call yesterday. in terms of, volunteers being concerned about their safety. What are we doing within the industry? We'll talk about training. Will there be new training that's required, and what might that be in terms of new job roles and so on? We'll talk about systems and innovations. Shannon's seen some great innovations around the world. Obviously, he's got an amazing system with Rosterfy, but what systems are you using, and what innovation might you be able to do in terms of managing and attracting your volunteers? We'll talk about roles and the possibility of new job descriptions, touch on budgets and what impact that may have. And I think, the reality that we're getting from all of these calls that we're having is there's clearly more questions than answers at the moment, but we have to go through some kind of scenario planning and move towards ultimately, hopefully, that day not too far away when we start to press the green button and be able to move forward. And then we'll talk about recruiting, challenges of, in many instances, aging volunteer workforce that are concerned about their safety because they're in high risk. The fact of universities and schools and things being closed. And then, as I said, we'll take questions all the way through, come back to you at the end with a summary, but please feel free to make this as interactive as possible. And why don't we start by throwing to you, Shannan, and just kind of giving a bit of a sense of, what you're seeing. You're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, as obviously many of the panelists are, but you're dealing with it on a much more global nature. What are some of the things you're seeing? And whilst you're talking, I'm going to pull that poll down. So just quickly, industry sector, we're obviously heavy mass participation skewed, and a few others there. And I'm going to pop up just one other poll just to get a sense of, I'll share that on the screen for you. And then in a little bit, I'm going to pop up one just to get a sense of where within that industry sector, whether you're an event organizer or whatever, but maybe throw to you, Shannan, just to give us a little bit of a kickoff of what you're seeing, please.
Sure, thanks, mate. And great intro, and pretty obvious the large numbers for mass participation sports there for today. So hopefully we keep this very relevant there. I guess what we're seeing, with us at Rosterfy, I think we have close to 1 million volunteers on our platform worldwide. A large portion of that for mass participation and charities and major events. That number is down to about 10% active at the moment worldwide. So in terms of active volunteering, for events, clearly everyone's in the same boat. Those numbers are drastically reduced. One thing I guess we are seeing is people are taking two options. One is a shutdown shop in regards to communication to volunteers, or they build a plan to actively engage their volunteers through this period, through hopefully some of these strategies we'll talk through today, like training, engagement, reward and recognition, and others. And spotlighting some volunteers that do a great job and diving deeper into volunteer databases. So I guess hopefully out of today, if there's one thing we can get out of it, is about the positives of engaging your volunteers, even though they may not be required right now, because never before will your volunteers be more important to help with the recovery of this effort, combined with reduced headcounts internally, but also just the ability to return your events with the costs that come with putting on events. So yeah, it's lots of different perspectives that are out there at the moment. So I'm interested to see what we come up with today.
Thanks, Shannan. That's great to hear. Obviously great to hear in terms of the different options that people are taking. Not great to hear that we're down to kind of 10%. In a workforce, which I guess is pretty much understandable at this stage.
Yep, it is.
In terms of everybody just having to wait and see what's going on. Why don't we go across and hear from a UK perspective, and maybe come across to you, Kirsty, and maybe just again talk about that communication side of things. What are you at Human Race doing at the moment? I mean, you've just had, in some ways, a huge virtual event. You've had the 2.6 challenge, which has been many of the players in the industry coming together, which was great to see. But my sense is, quite a lot of involvement from Human Race in that, and volunteers involved. But relative to that, and just generally around your events, you have quite a wide portfolio of running and cycling and triathlons, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for mentioning the 2.6. It's still going, so still get involved. That was an amazing initiative, and we can't take kind of full credit for it at all. Absolutely, it was the coming together of the industry, which has been really great to see in the UK, actually. We've really kind of pulled together, and we're discussing, and sort of, yes, we are competitors, but we are talking to each other and sharing, and and learning from each other, which I think is a really, really nice environment that's come out of this. It's definitely been a bonus that has arrived. We're obviously all in the same situation in sort of a tricky time this year. In terms of communication, I mean, it's key, not just now. Oops, sorry, I'm just close off my screen. But always, I think if you haven't done it, then you definitely need to start now. But I think volunteers can often be slightly left to the last minute or kind of forgotten about that staffing aspect of your event. You kind of come to it at some point, but actually it should be built from the start. So you should be knowing what you need to have from the start, but start building those relationships. And I think relationships are going to be more key than ever now. People are less likely to volunteer on a whim and just sign up and just do something at the last minute. So I think it's building that trust, building those relationships, those communications. It's really going to be key, especially now.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't agree more with that. Maybe, you know, from an Ironman perspective, Shaun, why don't we come to you in Singapore? Obviously, you know, part of the Ironman group with this big global portfolio, and you're busy working on, you know, towards, I'm guessing your key focus there is the Standard Chartered Singapore Marathon in December, which is, you know, a reasonable way off. But what are some of the things that you're doing from a communication standpoint?
I think from us, it's more so on still keeping in touch with the volunteers. I mean, we are on Rosterfy, the platform that's from Shannan. In a sense, we want to just keep them engaged in terms of what's happening, not telling them like, look, there's nothing ahead. But what we want to do now is to tell them that, look, the event's still going on, team's still going on. And then what we're also adding on to the communications is the echoing of what the government pushes up from the health agencies, like staying safe, all the safety measures and all the safe distancing measures. But in a sense, we are also talking to them about the possible new roles that are going to be coming up. So it's more so on just getting them involved in the planning as well. So agreeing with what Kirsty is saying, like volunteers shouldn't be left to the last minute kind of planning. So we started the planning for the volunteers way before even this whole COVID came about. We started at the beginning of the year talking to the other FAs on what's required. So we have a sensing of what numbers we are talking about. So again, the journey doesn't end at the year itself. We are talking about retaining them, rewarding them. So a very similar journey like what Shannan has mentioned. So that's purely on what we are doing in terms of communication. But again, without the physical presence that we have now, so just tapping on the main platforms like Rosterfy, even going on social media platforms like our IG page or Facebook pages, and even traditionals. So like even reaching out to captains, getting them to talk to their groups of people. And then now even this year, we are actually talking to like the volunteer associations to talk about getting groups instead of individuals. So I think that's how we are just keeping in contact with the generals and the volunteers at large.
Yeah, and I sense that's going to be quite an important strategy as the challenges, and we'll talk a little bit about the challenges later in terms of unis being closed and the opportunity to make contact with people, that group strategy. I guess we've spoken to the two events there that are big city-based event, London and Singapore. Emma, moving over to you, you're more of a rural destination-based events, albeit that you have 30 events a year and they're in bigger locations. But how does that differ in terms of the communication that you have with your volunteers, or is it the same? And what kind of, I mean, we've spoken about communication, but what kind of messaging is there? Is it all about the event and the events on, or is it more about building engagement and sharing content that might be interesting to them rather than just telling them what's happening in terms of the events happening?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. One of the advantages that we have is our events are very regional, so we have a very sort of a personal, close contact with nearly all our volunteers, whether it be myself or some of our teams. So we have a really close connection with them. Over the last few weeks, and we've just started in the last few weeks to start to sort of branch out and connect with them. And so we've used just a bit of we call it the 3 C's, which is a bit of confidence, connecting with them, and also care, and maybe cautious as well. I suppose the concern we have is the unknown. So some of the restrictions and the things that we'll have to put in place for our volunteers to come and help us, we may think that those things are okay, but local authorities and that may say something different. So that's pretty a bit of the hurdles that we've got to face with trying to get our volunteers back. But we're not having too much problems yet. We'll wait and see when our authorities start to open up the gates for mass participation events.
Great, thanks for that. I've just had a question come in, not on the chat, but on the email that, you know, it's maybe a little bit part of communication. It might fall under one of the others. But the question from Abdallah is, COVID-19 caused a lot of job losses in all countries. Would these jobless people become occasional volunteers? And if that's the case, they represent a different cast of the usual volunteers' profiles. How to accommodate programs and benefits accordingly? Maybe one to throw to you, Shannan?
Yeah, just if I can jump on that, because I just actually got off a webinar with Mother's Day Classic here in Australia. I think they did that extremely well. What they did, Mother's Day Classic was the prime example of an event that similar to Grand Prix in a sense of 100 locations, massive size. They needed to go virtual, had struggles with headcount internally. What they needed to do was to change the way they marketed their event. They needed to change the way they promoted their event. They needed to change the way that they engaged their volunteers. So in order to do that, they also didn't have the money to spend and hire new people to do these things. What they did was dived into their volunteer database and asked questions about, hey, do you have skills in graphic design? Do you have skills in creating virtual assets? Who knows how to create a Zoom background? And within a day, they had 75 qualified candidates that could help in 12 different succinct areas of the business they had shortfalls in. And they were able to bring those volunteers basically into the organization to help fill gaps that were created by the need to adjust and pivot the way they normally operated. I just thought the lesson out of that was being clear on what your gap was that you needed to fill. Go directly to your volunteers to ask the question. They're with you for a reason. They want to help. If they can use the skills and they actually feel valuable, then that's fantastic. And then be clear on the amount of roles that you need filled, and then go from there and make sure that you execute and appreciate them properly, and engage them so that they stay with you, not just as a once-off. So I think that's valuable. And then I think for those that are, lots of people are around now that are skilled and qualified that have more time on their hands. So what a great opportunity to help recruit these people into your organization now. And then, like I said, how do you retain those people for the long term? Because they're clearly valuable for your organization.
Thanks, Shannon. That's perfect timing. Kevin Harmer asking, do you think a mixture of media platforms will be key to communicate to volunteers? Videos, webinars, traditional email, comms? Anyone like to have a go at that? Shaun, maybe? I'm guessing it's my sense is the answer is that it absolutely needs to be a mix.
Yeah, I think it's a new normal that we are getting ourselves into, and with the main focus of reducing touch points with the volunteers as much as possible. I mean, essentially the best case scenario is to really just meet the volunteers for the very first time, but well equipped at the event itself. So using all forms of media will be really important, like being able to use Rosterfy to upload like training videos or training presentation slides that it's easily accessible to them. And then even like using platforms like social media, Facebook, where they're able to actually get targeted question answered or targeted training modules that are going to be uploaded there. So I think it's really crucial that we have a mix of everything. So really just extending the creativity and being innovative about how we are going to be able to train. I mean, those were the days are gone that we are able to have volunteers go for recce's as much as possible with us, go on good recce's, go on venue walkthroughs and everything. And unfortunately, we can't. But that doesn't take away the fact that we have to get them trained and ready for deployment on event day. So it's really about being creative and innovative across all media platforms.
So what you're saying, that as an example, you're potentially going out to aid station locations for the marathon, you're videoing them, you're taking photos, you're uploading those onto platforms, and your aid station leaders and your core sector leaders and the like are familiarizing themselves through the video that you've taken?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just really tapping really deep into what we have available on hand. Like during planning, we do have a lot of available technology that we are already using. So why not think more innovatively how we can actually incorporate those information into a form of training for the volunteers without having to have so many touch points with them?
Yeah, that's a kind of an interesting segue, which is probably not exactly where the question from Kevin was aimed at. My gut is that Kevin was probably asking about how you engage and keep them engaged and occupied as you lead up to this. But it's a really great point, and I guess highlights the value of this technology that we have available. You know, one of the things that's on the agenda is budgets and you know, training venues and so on. Generally quite expensive doing, you know, first-hand training. So here's an opportunity potentially where budgets are going to be stretched to actually be able to reduce your training costs. Any thoughts on that from your side, Emma?
Not so much with the budget thing, but as I go back to what Shaun was saying before, we've done a few videos from different staff members. You know, one's from myself and one from my volunteer director, and we've sent it out to our volunteers. We make it a bit more jovial, or a bit more fun and not so serious, but just want to sort of tell them that we're still thinking of them. You know, connecting with them and just giving them confidence that when we do come back, that we're going to put some things in place so they can come back to our events with confidence. And that doesn't cost much at all.
No, great point. And so while we're talking about confidence, you know, one of the things you spoke about moving into the safety bucket on the planning call last night, you mentioned that you have, you know, quite a lot of your volunteers are from Rotary clubs, Lions Club, older people, and they're already just putting their hand up and saying, look, it's not for us, unfortunately. We're not prepared to take the safety risks. And so what does that mean to you as an organization? You know, from a percentage perspective, how do you cover that? And what are you doing from a safety perspective right now? Whilst I said before that there's probably more questions than answers, we don't really know what the new normal is going to be in terms of guidelines and requirements from governments, although there's lots of work being done. How do you address that at this stage, and how do you communicate that safety is a priority to you?
Yeah, well, some of the things we've done already started to, we've worked with our operations team to work out you know, nearly the process that everyone takes from the day they enter to right through to when they finish. So if they're entering and they rock up to a race and they normally go and get their t-shirt or their towel or their merchandise, they probably won't be able to do that. We'll have to post that to them. And things like, you know, I said the other day was, you know, for aid stations now, so instead of having 15 people on an aid station, we might have one or two, and you'll have layers and layers of cups of water where they'll help themselves, or you know, we won't have late entries on the day. You know, it'll be everything will be online. So you know, the cash component on the day will go away, and with just lots of little bits and pieces that we'll put into place right through the process. The finish line, you know, we don't know whether they're going to be able to bring one spectator with them, 2 spectators, or no spectators at all. And I think one of the things we said the other day was our concern is all these little guidelines that need to be put into place will affect the experience of the athletes and the volunteers. So whether they still want to come along and have this, they won't have the same experience. So that's another concern as well, the experience that they won't have.
Yeah, so what you were saying, it's fun, it's camaraderie, and if you're doing it all at social distance with a mask on your face, it takes away some element of that engagement. That is there a way that you can replace that, or how do you compensate for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to think of sort of some ideas that will happen. You know, I mean, you normally see at the end of a race when everyone wants to sit there and compare their times and be proud of what they've done and their achievements. And if you've got staff and people sort of moving them on, and you know, and they can't hang around and you know and have a beer or a water or some other product, you know, they're all moved on. It's just going to change the whole mood and the feeling of your event. So you know, that's a bit of a concern. So you know, and from a volunteer point of view, you know, at our recovery area where you have 10 people at recovery in one of our recovery tents, serving, you know, ice cream and fruit and all that sort of stuff. Everything might have to be packaged now, so you're going to have less volunteers, and I mean the athletes might just have to pick it up and move on. But you know, that's pretty a concern we have as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. Kirsty, maybe coming across to you, just you know, the safety element, how you're communicating it. What, you know, again, you know, probably more questions than answers at the moment as well. But what are some of the things you're doing at the moment within what is known?
Yeah, there's a lot of grey at the moment across everywhere. You find you can only plan so far down a certain path before you kind of stop and think, what about that direction, for a while. So it's a tough time for everybody working on it. I think volunteers, in terms of reassurance and safety, I think it is all around reassurance. So we can't control everything. So the wider environment, the media, the government, their messaging and stuff, it has an influence on individuals, but we can reassure and influence to as much as we can. So I think it goes, like I said, back to those relationships, the tone that you use with them, that they trust you, they start to build that up. Oops, sorry, I'm just fixing my screen. So it's all about building trust. I think would massively help with that at all. So how you can do that and think of ways that you can build that in with volunteers. One thing that we've done with the participants that I would like to do with volunteers, we haven't as yet, is we've sent out a questionnaire. So that was for our postponed marathon in October, Manchester Marathon, and asking them sort of what measures would make them feel safer at the event, and to vote from like 1 to 10, you know, not at all, not relevant at all, very important to have, and just to get a gauge really of what people are thinking, because there's so much in the media and there's talk about gloves. Are gloves actually helpful, or is it just a visual reassurance beyond their actual physical kind of capabilities? Masks, what do people think about that? Screening, temperature screening, various things. So we've done that for the participants. I think we'll look to do that for the volunteers as well, and then you're really engaging them in it. You're hearing it from them and what they actually think, and they feel part of the process. They feel consulted. They feel like you are thinking about them and including them in that. And I think that's the big thing with volunteers. What I always say to everyone I work with is they make them feel like they're part of the event delivery team. It's not a them and us. You know, it's not us organising and they just come and help. So we don't even kind of call them volunteers often. Things, you know, if we're communicating with them, we call them, you know, the event team or the delivery team. Welcome to the delivery team, as a kind of thing. And it's a bit psychological perhaps, but also it's genuine. You know, we want them to feel like they're engaged and they're a part of that. So I think that reassurance and how you build that trust maybe is by continuing to talk to them, even if you've got nothing to say. So just regular updates, tell them when you're next going to be in touch. Even if you've got nothing, you could just update them on sort of behind the scenes things. I mean, that's what we tend to do in normal times. During the planning stage, we have regular communication with them just to keep them in the loop. They haven't forgotten about us, so they still turn up. They don't kind of get that communication 2 weeks out about their role and suddenly think, oh, I'm supposed to be doing something in 2 weeks. It's always in their mind. So I think sort of whatever you can do in your influence to reassure them, but the wider media scene and government scene is definitely going to have an influence as well, so you can only do so much.
Yeah, that's great. There was a great piece of communication. I don't know if anyone saw it. London Marathon put out either yesterday or today. I saw it on LinkedIn today, and you know, I thought the way that it was crafted, the messaging that was in there is, you know, clearly they're in a position where they're wrestling to make a decision, and they're not in a position to make one. But rather than just sit there and let people surmise and see what's happening in media and social media, they put out a very clear and well thought through statement. So yeah, the communication, very key. Why don't we jump into training, Shannan? And obviously one of the things that the platform does is make training you know, easier to do, and Shaun has touched on that. But you know, just some tips around training, what you're seeing, what can be done. Can we be using this downtime in inverted commas to be training? You know, what are some of the innovations that you're seeing globally around training?
Yeah, big time. I think there's a couple of things there. One is that we've always been pushing clients to be getting to online inductions and trainings. If nothing else, just for the fact of engaging your volunteers, similar to Kirsty's point about making sure that they feel empowered to do the job. I think one thing with retention of volunteers is if they think they're doing something and then they turn up, you're short on numbers, they end up stacking fences in the car park. They're not coming back. So making sure that they are empowered to do the job that you are asking them to do can only lead to a better success for both the event organizer, but also for the volunteer that feels empowered to do that role. The other part being the induction, and I think this is something that's going to become pretty crucial, if not mandatory, for volunteers moving forward, is around inducting not just for health and safety, but inducting for, I guess, the new COVID restrictions. So if you're working on a drink station, that you as an event organizer can show government or whoever needs to see it that your volunteers have done training and be able to report on that training to show that not only have we sent them something, but they have actually completed an induction based on the new rules involved with manning these stations. So that's a couple of key points there. And slightly to the side of training, Chris, I think is is interviewing and tracking online and starting to segment your database into skill sets that can relate to these things. So how do you find those diamonds in your volunteer database that might have skill sets that can either step up, like Kirsty mentioned, into the team, further progress them into it. So using this time to not only train and induct them, but also understand who the diamonds are in your volunteer database and try and bring them more into your organization, not just as a drink station volunteer.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for that. Zaid Johari, sorry. I've seen your question there. It's a little bit off track in terms of the volunteer stuff, but I'd love to try and get back to it. But if you'll just bear with us, just want to let you know that I'm not ignoring your question. I just want to try and focus on the volunteer workforce stuff, but we'll come back to you on that one. Shaun, just you're interested from a training perspective. You touched a little bit on it before, but obviously a big global organization. You've already mentioned that you're on the Rosterfy platform, but what are some of the things that you're doing that are maybe a little bit more innovative? You already shared the videos and so on, but are there any trends that you've seen over the last couple of years, or things that have now happened during this period that got their roots in things that you were doing before we got to COVID, as an example of preparing yourself and I guess harnessing this time to come out of this stronger from a training perspective?
I think one of the main things that we are trying to really go and work around is really just to reduce the touch point. So something that we might be pushing out this year will be like a train-the-trainer program. So instead of having the luxury of getting in the volunteers by the thousands to do a physical induction, it's more like just physically engaging only the captains or the leaders. And then that's where these leaders, in words of Shannan, will be empowered to actually do all the further trainings and communications for us to reduce the touch points. And the other thing is really just going around technology to see how we are able to be more innovative in terms of the materials and deliverables that we are presenting to the volunteers. Instead of a static slide, it could be possibly an animated process of how an aid station is being run and set up. So things like that are being experimented on our end.
That's great, thank you. Why don't we move? I guess we're talking about training. It kind of segues in from there. Roles and job descriptions. We touched a little bit on. Is it going to change? Are there going to be new roles that are going to come? They're going to be temperature checkers. Emma, you've indicated that some roles may disappear. But what's your sense of what the typical job descriptions roles will be, and how you're going to adjust for that as we move forward?
As I said before, we've sort of gone with our operation team from sort of woe to go, and just have a look at the what we'll do if the restrictions that we think will happen actually happen. So and as I've said before, touched before there, we may have to have some people who sit there and do temperature checks when they get there. As they're going through, as they're going into a transition area or into where they start to race, we'll have to have people there that, we might only have 2 or 3 people to a bike rack instead of 5 to a bike rack. In triathlon, we might have to have all rolling starts, those sort of things. So in that case, then I probably think that we'll need less volunteers out there, which is a good thing, because we're probably going to get less volunteers. But I can't see too many extra roles right now that's going to come into play with what's happening.
Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts? Thanks for that. What's your thoughts on that, Kirsty? Kirsty, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's a great time to re-examine all the roles. I think that should happen sort of naturally anyway. I think sometimes you can kind of get stuck into a bit of a rut of just having the same things on repeat and just getting those same people back or those same groups back, and not really examining the efficiencies of the different areas and kind of doing that. So I think it's a great opportunity to look at it. I think you're right. I think in the short term, potentially there's less roles. I mean, there's still plenty of roles, but I think maybe, Mark talks about, or it might have been Shaun, can't remember, sorry. Water stations, is in the short term actually that people pick up their own water or bring their own water rather than it being given out, for example. So that can massively reduce down the number of roles. And that is kind of what participants are actually looking at. That was one of the questions that we asked in our questionnaire to them. Would that provide more reassurance because there's less interaction? So I think it's going to be a mixture of things, but I think the biggest opportunity is for everybody to re-examine their roles and really look at it and see what is possible. I think more roles will come, but there might more likely be stewarding paid roles, I think, rather than volunteer roles.
So that's and Shaun touched on that a little bit last night in the planning call. Is the people that are testing temperatures might be difficult for them to be a volunteer that's in that space because there might be some degree of qualification. So there's potential that you're going to be having to look at some roles will kind of maybe migrate to being more of a payroll, a professional services company bringing that, and there'll be some changes in the makeup of the workforce for sure.
Yeah.
Would be your
I think it's also to reassure the health agencies on how the process of these temperature taking measures are being executed. I mean, just explaining to the agencies that it's going to be taken up by volunteers may not sound robust enough for them. So eventually, it might be a mandate from the government agencies that it has to be a paid service. But I think just riding on Kirsty's point, it's really about, before we can even talk about the roles and the new roles or even the current roles, it's really to understand the current function that we're talking about, to optimize and streamline the process of the function in order to actually come up with the optimum number of volunteers. I mean, we may be overstaffing an aid station. If we are able to actually streamline the process, understand what each volunteer has to do at the aid station, can actually cut down the numbers of volunteers drastically and keeping them safe as well. So I think it's really going back to, it's taking this opportunity as us as event organizers to understand what each and every role it's supposed to execute on event day.
Yeah, it's a great point, and comes back to job descriptions and systems. Maybe Shannan, maybe just that was one of the buckets we spoke about, is that the whole process. And without making this a promotion for Rosterfy, I guess you've got those systems in, but just some guidelines in terms of what systems people should be integrating in terms of classifying those job roles, processing people through to make sure that you touch all this, and what are the opportunities to tweak those, whether you're a small event working off an Excel spreadsheet or someone working on a more sophisticated system like you. What are some of the important things to be focusing on from a systems perspective at this stage?
Yeah, I think look, we lean on the experts here, and actually, I think it was last year, we did a white paper on major event workforce management and basically top 10 tips. We brought in people from the Super Bowl, from Grand Prix, from other major events around the world, who gave us insight into the steps every single step along the journey to run a successful workforce program. So I'd recommend people get to just rosterfy.com and download that white paper for insight into those key steps, compared to me trying to reel them all off for tonight, Chris. And I think, I just think the online side of things, it's something that, in my opinion, should have been happening the whole time anyway. So hopefully this is just a push or a nudge in the right direction to streamline the way organizations manage their volunteers, get out of spreadsheets, move online, and engage more through automated communication. So your volunteers do feel part of your journey, just like Kirsty again was talking about. Make sure they feel part of what you're doing, and safe, obviously, asking them those questions, surveying them, using that data correctly, and making sure they feel heard.
Right, thanks for that. And again, maybe, Emma, slightly different in your situation because you're a smaller community, but still absolutely key. You've got those systems in place. You've got that communication that's happening with a smaller community. The principles are the same as what they are for a big event.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're going to do a lot more now, we've done it a bit before, but is do like 30-second to 1-minute videos, because the first time we'll probably have contact now with our volunteers will be race day. We don't get to do a lot of training prior. In our business, in particular, we make our little videos a bit comical. So building videos now that might only take 30 seconds to a minute of 2 people in an aid station with face masks and gloves, and and someone running past in a gorilla suit, or just something that makes it a little bit comical. And I think that they sit up and they listen to it a bit more than reading 2 or 3 pages document that they've already seen so much about COVID over the last 3 months, that if they see a video, and in our business, it feels a bit more personal. So, I mean, we'll create a few little videos around, whether it be coming to registration, there's only 2 people in a large tent now than 12, and each different sort of a small area of operations that we use, whether it be on the beach or whether it be a drink station, whether it be the finish line, so they can have a visual of what they think it's going to be like. and we have a bit of a comical feel about it, make them feel comfortable, because, you know, no matter before COVID or now we're going to have to go into events post-COVID, you know, we always like our volunteers to leave and go home happy and excited and feel a part, that they enjoy the event as much as the athlete. So we've got to sort of make sure that they still do that, you know, even now when we're sort of heading with all these restrictions.
Sure, thanks for that. Folks, I'm going to launch, I'm going to jump into the chat boxes. We've got a few questions that have built up while we've been talking. I'm just going to launch another poll here while we do that, just to get a sense of what people think they're heading towards in terms of targeting a return to events. So I'm just going to throw this out there and see what response, just to get a sense of timings. And let's just go to the boxes here. So Kevin Harm is saying temperatures perhaps should be completed by first aid professionals in case they need to react. Absolutely, that would be my sense. Certainly, I think you're going to have that as part of your medical plan. There might be medical volunteers, but probably part of that. Abdullah has asked, can Kirsty share the questionnaire? This has been up here for a little while, but Kirsty, I think you were talking about a questionnaire that you sent out to your volunteers. Is that the one that you're referring to, Abdullah? Why don't we do this? If you wouldn't mind, drop me an email, chris@chrisrob.asia, and I will try and coordinate that through Kirsty and see if that works for you. Dermot, you're asking the question, are your volunteers paid? Great question. Maybe we just quickly do a straw poll of each of the panelists, Kirsty.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a complication. We do have some paid crew and volunteers, so we have a mixture.
Emo?
Yeah, all our volunteers are paid, whether they get paid personally, you know, one-on-one, or mostly it goes to their organisation that they're from. So they're not all volunteers.
Yeah. Shaun?
Generally, they're paid travel allowance, and for the group ones, they are actually paid to the organizations.
Thank you. What's your general sense, Shannan, if you were to look at that globally on a percentage basis? What in the old days, you know, they were literally volunteers, but my sense is that that's disappearing fast. What percentage-wise would you say people are now just the old-fashioned volunteers?
Yeah, it's certainly changed. Depends what industry you're talking about. In mass participation, I think it's a large portion is paid groups, football clubs, these sorts of things. That's what we're seeing. Unless the event has a real appeal outside of fundraising, major events like London Marathon, something that people want to go to and be involved with. Sometimes they're more individual volunteers, at least applicants, but it's often easier for event organisers to rely on a group to bring in 20, 30 instead of needing to find 30 individuals.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Wissam, hey, Wissam in Beirut. Do you think we need to increase the number of the medical team? You know, my sense is that's probably going to be the case. Why don't we come across to Shaun and Emo on that one quickly?
Yeah, we've already had good communication with our medical team. So yeah, I mean, we'll for sure we'll have to increase our medical team. More so to give people confidence as well, you know, both the athletes and the volunteers confidence that there is those medical people there. As soon as they see, you know, the red and white, they feel as though it's a bit more safe, and the event's more sort of a, you know, COVID clean, if you'd like to call it.
Yeah. Kirsty?
Yeah, definitely. I think, but we're not the experts in that, so we liaise with our medical team and our medical director and things, and they make the call. But obviously, we work very hand in glove with them in terms of the operations. So, you know, if we did go down the screening route, I don't know if that is the right route, to be honest, at the moment. But if that temperature screening happened, then absolutely those conversations need to be had at the same time. Because what is the policy? What is the routine if someone's temperature is high?
Yeah.
What you do, so you can only go so far in our planning. It's got to be integrated. So yes, but not alone, not making those decisions alone.
Yeah. And Shaun, I'm assuming that'll be the same thing in Singapore.
I think more so for us, it'll be more like understanding and restudying back the whole medical plan as a whole, because I mean, we won't just go directly into an increase, because end of the day, it's really understanding what the new SOPs are going to be. I mean, yes, it might be as obvious as just increasing the numbers just to get people's buy-in in terms of the safety. But on our end, we want to understand like the purpose of the increase, so that at least we are able to deal with the different situations correctly, instead of just just by sheer numbers, because if the process is not in place, having sheer numbers there and not knowing how to deal with it with the local health agencies would not actually make any sense to us. So yes, it's an increase and it will be a change, but it will be a bigger picture kind of exercise.
Yeah, it's a really great point, isn't it? It's not just about throwing extra numbers, and you know, in any part of this, it's got to be well thought through and strategized to make sure that it makes sense. And then obviously coming back to the point that's been made repeatedly, it's about good training and deployment with that. No point just throwing numbers at it if they're not properly briefed and trained and thought through. Yeah. With Sam, you've had a follow-up question about how can you ask runners who already paid registration and tell them that they're not allowed to participate because his or her high temperature. I mean, I think we can talk about the whole medical thing for quite a while. What I would suggest is this time next week, in fact, an hour later next week, 7 o'clock, we've got the second edition of the new operational normal. We've got Mike Nishi, who is from Chicago Marathon, and Hugh Singh, who's the medical director of Shaun's event, the Standard Chartered Singapore Marathon. There'll be a lot of medical related stuff around that, and we'll be talking about that. But, you know, the point is valid, but at the end of the day, you know, someone turns up, they've got, and this is one of the things we discussed, that without going too far down a rabbit hole, we discussed it on the last one, this, you know, the liability of someone's trained for 4 months to run a marathon. You tell them they've got a high temperature, you don't let them run it, and then they end up testing negative to COVID, and you've deprived them of their opportunity to participate in the event. So there's a whole bunch of challenges around this new operational normal, but I'd encourage you to sign in next week. Dermot, sorry, Karen.
There's something in there. I mean, we're talking about screening participants, but if we're doing that, does everybody at the event need to be screened? It kind of opens up other questions as well in volunteers. And is there something that we have to do in this volunteer process at some point? And I'm not saying yes, there is, but just thinking about it, some sort of self-declaration that they are fit and well to attend the event. Do participants have to redo that? Not as necessary as a screening, but click on an app in the morning, or, you know, is that going to become the new normal, something that we might have to do? I don't know that it is, but we're kind of looking at every opportunity, really, and everything. But volunteers fall into that, you know, if we're talking about temperatures, there's other people on site, so where does it end or where does it start? Yeah, no,
it's a great point, and as we stand at the moment, it's volunteers, it's participants, it's contractors, it's suppliers, and it's spectators as well, isn't it? And its equipment, you know, it goes across a whole range. Shannan, I mean, your sense around that, I mean, what are you seeing happening? Is it starting to be built into systems, kind of checks and declarations and so on around COVID yet?
Yeah, big time. One thing we're learning from community sport here in Australia as we start to return is the need to track attendance of people. So perhaps slightly different to mass participation, where it's one big event, maybe a couple of times a year. For community sport, it's training every day at the club, parents coming in. And one thing, I guess, what we're learning is about attendance tracking is one thing, but also having pop-up questions on the check-in. So using technology to do that, to ask questions about, do you have the COVID Safe app? So here in Australia, that's our process. I'm sure around the world, they've got their own things as well. Because let's face it, we're not the experts in this field. There's the apps that track if you have the right, you've been to doctors, these sorts of things. Let the experts do their things. And I think Shaun's summarized it really well tonight about going, let's focus on what we're good at. And Kirsty's points around going, we can communicate what we can communicate, like London Marathon events, sharing that press release yesterday, communicating what we know. But one thing you can do is on check-in, be asking questions that pop up automatically, asking questions that you need answers on, so that, to Shaun's point, when the medical authorities ask you questions, you have the data in a simple platform that's there, compared to trying to track down your 12 different check-in locations with 12 different spreadsheets in different people's handwriting that might have coffee stains on them. How do you automate and bring that stuff online so that if and when someone tries to come back, because I can only imagine the amount of not lawsuits or whatever can potentially come out of this, of saying, but you put me in danger, I was running with someone next to me, or a volunteer I was with had this or whatever. So you need to be able to check people in to know distinctly where they were and who they were with as best you can, and that's through online systems and asking questions that relate to health authorities.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Folks, I'm just going to quickly share the results of that poll that's been running. The bulk of people seem to be thinking they're heading back to events in September, 28%, 19% in October. Not too much before that, but I'll share those results. We've got about just under 10 minutes to go. I want to maybe touch on budgets and recruiting, but in the meantime, we've got Felicity Taylor Armstrong who's got her hand up. Do you want to just ask your question, Felicity? Felicity?
Felicity?
Felicity, I've unmuted you there, but I'm trying to unmute you. It won't allow. Maybe you want to just put your question in the chat box for now, and we'll keep moving on to. Let's move on to budgets. What's your sense? And it's how long is a piece of string, as we've said. There's so many questions, but maybe the simple way to answer. I'm not going to be asking for. If you want to stick your neck out and say percentages, you're budgeting an extra X percent of your budget, or do you expect budgets broadly to increase as a result of this from a volunteer perspective, volunteer workforce perspective? What's your sense? Maybe starting with you, Emma.
Again, I think we're going to be in a reasonably good position because most of our events are within the same state, so we don't have international travellers, we don't have many interstate competitors. So most of our guys are fairly loyal, and they'll just drive to our events like they normally do, and it might be a day or two drive, but they'll get to there. But from a budget point of view, we're starting to work with a few other suppliers around the country on bulk buying things that we'll need to produce an event. We don't have a global corporation or anything like that that can purchase sort of in massive quantities. So we'll work with other suppliers, and whether it be face masks or sanitizing gear or bottled water for the finish line. Another positive that's come out of this with us is we've just got a little bit more sponsorship out of some of the larger supermarkets that have probably just they've pretty done quite well over the last 6 or 8 weeks. And so they're coming on board now with packaged food items for the finish line and packaged food items for our volunteers. And instead of making sandwiches and things like that, they're getting all packaged items. So that's a bit of a bonus to have sort of, and that'll help your budget as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Shaun?
I think budgets, if you're talking about budgets as a whole, it's definitely going to be impacted, but it's a matter of diving deeper to understand, is it going to be a positive impact or a negative impact? Positive impact being a budget having to spend less with a more streamlined process, having less volunteers as one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum could possibly come from the additional services, from the safety measures and everything that has to be in place or mandated by the government health agencies and stuff like that. So I think definitely budgets are impacted, but really a good advice for everyone out there to just really dive back into your primary principles of planning and relook at all the processes all over again. I think this is a really good opportunity for everyone to revisit that planning that has been rehashed over year with the same event. So I think, budgets will be impacted, but don't fret yet, but just understand what needs to be done first.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you. Kirsty, your side?
Great advice. I'm slightly more pessimistic in terms of budget. I think it is the biggest worry. I think, we've been talking about fairly big events now, but there's a whole plethora of events, all the small events as well, that rely on volunteers and actually don't have the budget to replace them. I think the biggest kind of budgetary area is no-show. You can do all this reassurance, you can do as much as you can, but you are relying on people turning up, whether you're giving a donation or not. And we've got hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that are needed. We may be able to reduce the roles down a bit by slimming the water stations and changing what those are temporarily. But I think, is the new normal going to stay, or is it just a temporary normal? So it's going back. But I think it could be huge, and it could make events not viable, I think, really, if volunteers aren't there. So that's why it's so important to kind of build those relationships and get them in, but you're relying on goodwill, so it's hard. So I think you've got a budget, have something in contingency wise for not, and if that is possible within your budget, something to examine fairly early on, I think. And I think, unfortunately, unless people do come back, it's going to be the end of quite a few events.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. There's so many unknowns around it, and you know, on one level you're going to be reducing, but on other levels possibly increasing. So yeah, it's interesting, definitely. And again, the point that we've made so many times, there's so many questions at the moment. It's just so hard to be making any conclusive decisions, isn't it? Yeah. Why don't we've got about probably just under 5 minutes left. I'd like to move on, and we've got a couple more questions that we'll come to. But Shannan, maybe just going across to you, recruitment. I think, you know, that's going to be one of the real challenges. So, you know, one of the things Mike Nishi was sharing in the new normal, Chicago Marathon has 2,000 medical volunteers, I think was the number that he was saying. They've got an October date. All of the colleges, medical colleges, universities are all closed at the moment. And so, you know, even if they have an event, how do they get to those people? Some of you said in the planning call, you're seeing some quite innovating stuff happening. Is that around recruitment? Any tips that you've got for people that are listening in? What should they be doing about recruitment? How are there ways to make that easier and streamline it and get to their targets when indeed they have a target?
Yeah, I think engaging with those that have been put on furlough, similar to what we discussed before, university students that aren't required on campus, whether they go or not anyway, who knows? But I think the opportunity is there to make a stand and come out even more positive than it was before. I totally hear Kirsty and Emma, or really everyone's point about the concern that volunteers may not want to come back. But I also see the other side, which is the positive side. The community spirit and wanting to give has never been higher. I think, Kirsty, I reference in the UK, the NHS, however million volunteer applications they received for people wanting to help. And that was when COVID was at its peak. So people putting their hand up, wanting to help out. I understand that that's a little different to a mass participation event, but you guys create such an incredible impact to the communities that you're involved with, and volunteers are there for a reason. So the asking for help, asking them to share, and if there's one innovation or one way to do that, Chris, is about what we see organisations doing well is engaging universities, having their own registration link for volunteer applications, having leaders at universities spruiking for you and doing that. So they're building their own groups, keeping those groups, the data together, and allocating those groups to shifts together. So all of your mates can work on the same drink station together. It might be basic instinct, but if you are just putting that all into a big spreadsheet and you need 3,000 volunteers, you'll find 3,000 individuals spread across the course. So recruiting in groups as best you can and empowering others to recruit on your behalf, because people are more likely to connect with that individual and their motivation. And my last point, Chris, is about going, the way we see things is treat your volunteers as if they were your participants or your fundraisers, because the money that they save organisations, they are just as crucial as participants in a way. So how do you engage them, treat them well, and little things like reward and recognition elements, which are crucial, which probably not a lot of people are thinking about, but maybe use this downtime now to invest in innovation and changing the way you engage your volunteers and making them want to come back with incentives, maybe from sponsors.
That's a really great point. Yeah, absolutely. Treat them as gold. They save you money. They don't cost you money at the end of the day. Folks, we're out of time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a very quick summary of some of the main points I've picked up. There are a couple of questions. The panelists have said they're happy to stay for another few minutes afterwards, maybe 10, 15 minutes, I think. And I don't think it'll take us that long. But if you'd like to stay, we'll come through. There's a few questions there, Jeff Basserman, Greg Darcy, a couple of others. So let me just quickly do a wrap for those that do need to go. I think starting with a point that's been made repeatedly, communication so key. Treat them like they're your participants, as Shannan just said, but make them feel valuable, engage with them, ask them what would make them feel comfortable at the event, and it's not just this is what we're doing, what do you think? Involve as much of it as possible. Understand that there's lots of gems in there. If you've got other things that you might need done, the example that was cited of the Mother's Day Classic, they had 75 candidates in 12 areas of the business to help them with a virtual event, and there's so many people out there that are willing and wanting to help, particularly in these times where many of them are probably bored at home. I think that the point that Emma made there, that the experience is really important for the volunteers, and what's the new normal going to be around that? is that going to be an impediment to them coming? And how can you think creatively around making sure that, even with social distancing, it can be a fun experience. They can come along and enjoy themselves and make it a memorable occasion for them and the participants. I think, a great point that was made there. I love the point that Kirsty made. We don't call them volunteers. We call them event delivery team. I think a great get away from that in them and us part of it. Shannan made a hugely, and I think probably one of the most important points for me of the whole webinar. Induction is going to become crucial and maybe mandatory. You're going to need to possibly prove to health authorities, and from a legal perspective, you're going to have the training in place, and you're going to have proved that you've had that training and protected yourself. So crucial to think about. Segmenting your database, understanding where the hidden diamonds are. Shaun made the point a number of times about the opportunity to reduce touch points. You're probably going to have to reduce touch points. It's got a cost benefit on the other side. It's a safety benefit on the other side. But how do you reduce those touch points but still arrive at the start line on event day with volunteers that are trained, that know their roles and understand what's going on and have been sufficiently briefed and educated? Use of technology, animated process, and so on. Time to re-examine all the roles. I think that was a point that was made by Kirsty, Shaun. I think Emma made it as well, that you've gone through the whole process. So take a step back. What does the new normal look like? This might present a great opportunity to completely restructure your roles, your workforce, not only your permanent workforce, your contractors, but your volunteers. Probably going to be a mix of paid and volunteer services. The 10 key steps that Shannan alluded to, the white paper, which was fantastic, that was done last year. And the other really good point, I think, important about the attendance tracking, it's probably going to be mandatory. So how are you preparing for that now, rather than have it hit on you a month before your event? We saw the poll there that the bulk of people seem to think they're coming back to the market in September. September's going to be here very quickly. What are you doing now to put these in place to know that you can track your volunteers? Budget, the jury's still a little bit out. Kirsty, concerned that it's going to have a massive impact on events and knock events out of the park. Shaun thinking that it might be a bit of a level playing field with some wins and some losses, and I think Emo seemed to subscribe to that as well. So, I mean, those are a bunch of them. I think some really great nuggets that hopefully people can take away with them. We've still got quite a lot of people on the call, so maybe just to reiterate a couple of things. There was a question about, is this being recorded? It is. It will be posted on the Mass Participation World YouTube channel, probably tomorrow or by latest Monday. Shannan's kindly put his email there, Shannan at Rosterfy, if you want to reach out on anything. If you want to contact me on anything, Chris at chrisrob.asia. Strength in numbers, Monday, 8:30 a.m., 4:30 p.m. Singapore time, just an open chat room. Next week, I really recommend next week, the new normal. Mike Nishi is one of the most sharing people that I've come across in the industry. And to see someone at that level in one of the world marathon majors who's happy to open his book and share what he's doing with people, it will be very insightful. And Hugh Singh, so that's next. Details will go out probably tomorrow or Monday on that. This time next week, Thursday at 7 p.m. Let's jump in to some of the questions here. Dermot, you've just made a comment that donations to respective clubs. Jeff Basserman, should media news conference briefings be read up since our 2020 case has been cancelled for now? I think that might be revved up or amped up. So yeah, look, I guess you're going to have to put in place a marketing plan that's going to communicate with people, typical to what you would do every year would be my sense, is that you kind of, that's specific to this. This is around volunteers as well. What is it that you want to communicate to your volunteers, when your event's going to be on, and so on. Brett Saxon, most medical advice received here is that on-site temp checks are not relevant or to be relied on. Yeah, look, again, I think that there's so much discussion around this. The recommendation that I'm making to people is that you need to have a bunch of scenarios. You need to try and get a seat with local government or your government agencies as soon as possible. The example last week, we did social distancing with Marcel Altenberg, who is a crowd scientist and has been working with the Bundesliga, which some of you that follow football would see the Bundesliga went live behind closed doors. The example that he gave was that they had 10 different scenarios that the Bundesliga took to German government agencies, and as a result of somehow hashing those scenarios, they were able to get to something that was able to allow them to return to play. What I recommend from an industry perspective, we should be getting together, and I know it's happening in different countries. There's a massive consortium in America. There's one in Australia where people are coming together to say, these are some ideas, and get to the table with agencies as soon as possible. That's easier said than done, because in most instances, they're dealing with COVID at the moment. But let's not wait until a month before our event when suddenly the green light's given and they come and say, you will do this, 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 and this, and it becomes very difficult. We have an opportunity as an industry to get engaged in the conversation, to be making suggestions, to start a dialogue, to have conversations, to understand what it is that we might be able to influence, rather than sit back and say, we're going to wait and be told that these are what we need to do. We have the opportunity to engage, to try and get some level of compromise. That would be my recommendation anyway. And I see a bit of nodding happening on the panel from that perspective. What about community environment for some cyber contests, drawing for youngest feedback? Absolutely, Jeff. You know, there's lots of virtual events happening. There's lots of esports happening. Greg Darcy, what about the environment with all these marks? How does an event stay green? It's a really great point. You know, Emma was talking earlier on about, you know, putting out meal packs and the participants collecting them. That has a sustainability impact. And we're going to have this fine balance of, do we have an event or do we impact sustainability? You know, there's no doubt that there's going to be some positives and some negatives out of this, and ultimately, hopefully, we can get some balance from that. Just going back to the chat. I'm new to the role of volunteer coordinator. This is Sally Culver at a running club, in itself a volunteer role. This has been very helpful and informed. Sorry, it's not a question. Thank you to all the speakers. Folks, that's great. I make it 10 past. I know that there was a lady who had her hand up earlier who I think has disappeared. Sorry, there's one new message coming up here. Oh, that's just a thank you. Folks, I think that's it. Let's just finish by a big thank you to our panelists for making the time. Thank you. Going from right to left, Kirsty Wilde from Human Race in the UK. Thanks for joining us, Kirsty. Mark Emerton joining us from Jervis Bay, south of Sydney. Shaun Nick dialing in from IRONMAN in Singapore. Thanks so much, Shaun. And Shannan, I think this must be, if I read your post right, this is your 5th webinar or something today. Thanks for staying the distance. I know in Australia for you guys now it's past 9 o'clock at night. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you that have tuned in from all over the world. Hope you found that useful. Feel free to reach out. We're here to work together to hopefully get back on track as soon as possible. Let's share the knowledge. If I can help anyone, please don't hesitate. Chris@chrisrob.asia. Have a great day, great night, wherever you are. Thank you so much. See you again soon. Bye for now.